So, salt and sugar have been a staple of every culture's diet for centuries. But do you think a teaspoon of sugar or a few dashes of salt are really all that bad for you? Well, today we are going to answer that question, and as well, I want to talk about what salt actually does in the body, as well as what sugar does in the body. Also, are there healthier alternatives? We're also going to talk about how to spot these ingredients when they're hidden in your food, and just how much salt and sugar is in some of your favorite foods. To help me sort out the fact and the fiction of salt and sugar, I want to welcome to the show a registered dietitian, Sharon Zarabi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a very salty palate, but I want to start with sugar. Okay? Now, as a registered dietitian, you probably teach all the time, right?
Yes, you're an educator.
So what are some of the things that people sort of are surprised to know about sugar?
A lot of people don't understand how sugar affects them and how sugar is actually lurking in a lot of the foods that you're eating. A lot of processed foods are high in sugar, and you know, as we are trying to manage our weight and we're trying to restrict the amounts of calories that we're eating, a lot of the foods that tend to be lower in fat tend to be higher in sugar.
Right, so we got really fat on that fat-free phase, right, that
The
we all went
low-fat
through?
phase, yep.
Because why? Spiked with sugar, all those products, correct?
Exactly, because when they take out an ingredient, when they take out fat from a product, they need to enhance the flavor, so they're going to add sugar.
So in your experience, are most people aware of how much sugar they consume on a daily basis?
You know, I think people think that when they're talking about sugar, it's like, oh, if I'm not eating chocolate bars or candy, I'm, you know, not consuming as much sugar as other people. But, you know, we're creatures of habit, and sometimes, you know, when we're having our coffee or our tea in the morning, we're not aware of how much sugar we're pouring into our beverages.
Sort of starts just being unconscious for folks.
Right, and also it's fine, even if it's an all-natural sugar, if you're drinking juice.
Right.
Although it may be a natural sugar, it's still high in calories
So
and
you've
still
got
considered sugar.
sometimes sugar in the beverages in the morning, so the hot beverages, and then juice perhaps, and people aren't really doing the math, is that correct?
Right, and I don't think anyone's really reading their food labels or you know, aware of the hidden sugars that are coming even in the bakery products.
Right, we're going to get to that, but here, now I heard that Mayor Bloomberg wants to actually put restriction on sugary sodas over 16 ounces. Do you think that that type of mandate is actually going to make a difference for folks?
You know, as a health professional and working with people who may not be as educated when it comes to nutrition and calorie counting, I think people need to be a little bit more aware of how much sugars and empty calories they're taking in. And I mean, it's not like he's saying you can't have your 32 ounces of soda. He's just making you more aware that if you want to have, you know, a larger serving, you have to feel accountable for your actions.
You have to buy it twice.
Right.
Right? So you think that actually it's going to bring people into more, to waking up to actually how much they're drinking?
I think it'll make people a lot more aware of what they're consuming throughout the day.
So sort of the creatures of habit sort of wake them up to like, wow, 16 ounces, 32 ounces, but 16 ounces is going to be the limit, and you think it's going to make a difference. Now, some cities have actually tried the same sort of move with salt. Why are we having such a hard time, such a difficult time with salt?
You know, what enhances our taste buds are sugar, salt, and fat. So when you start to take something and, you know, put all of these ingredients on top, it's going to make you want to consume more of it. So our portions start to increase. We start to even go into addictive behaviors of eating too much of something that our body doesn't need. And unfortunately, eating too much of salt can lead to some, you know, heart disease and other health ailments.
How can people educate themselves about the basics regarding this white stuff we're talking about, both salt and sugar?
So I try to really empower my patients and make them food detectives.
Right.
So, you know, it's a lot of it, again, as you mentioned, is educating them, reading food labels, being in tune with your body and understanding what you're putting in, where's it coming from, and trying to eat as close to the earth as possible, keeping it natural.
You know, I always have said, I think when people are informed, they're empowered. And I think, I mean, it's amazing to me sometimes when people just have that light bulb go off where they had no idea how much something they've been consuming.
Yeah. You know, the food industry does a great job manipulating the way that we think about food and making everything glorified. But again, they don't really go over the health risks of consuming too much
Right,
of their
because
product.
that might actually cut down on things that are selling pretty hot.
It's profit.
But it's true, as you said, you know, our taste buds, the way that we get motivated, it's actually orally through food, is through those things like salt and sugar. So people really need to be aware because it's very seductive in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's toxic. It's like a drug. Makes you want to have more of it.
Speaking of drugs, do you think that sugar and cocaine have anything in common? Well, stay tuned because we're going to find out. So when I got my allowance, I would immediately, as a kid, run down to the candy store and gobble up as much candy as possible. But as you see, to have a sweet tooth, you don't have to be a kid. And also to have issues with sugar in general, you certainly don't have to be obese. So back with me, Sharon Zarabi, registered dietitian. Thank you for being here. Let's get right to the point. Sugar and addiction. Can it be an addictive substance? And if so, how does that happen in somebody's body?
So basically, when we are consuming something that's high in sugar, we have these hormones, dopamine and serotonin, which make us feel good.
Right, our feel-good neurotransmitters.
Exactly. So the same way that alcohol or drugs affect some people to give them that compulsive behavior is the same thing that we're seeing with sugar products.
With all of the items that have added sugar can get triggered and it actually can become an addictive substance. So actually cocaine and sugar do have some things in common, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So how much sugar do you think is okay on a daily basis for folks?
Okay, so keep in mind that sugar is devoid of any nutrients. It's just a source of empty calories.
Right, completely nutritionally valueless.
Exactly. So we never really had any recommendations until recently. The American Heart Association suggested that females don't consume more than 6 teaspoons, which is about 100 calories of added sugar.
Okay, added sugar.
Right. And then for men, about 9 teaspoons, which is about 150 calories.
So what about kids? Any recommendations for how much sugar kids should be consuming?
You know, unfortunately, the obesity rates have nearly tripled in the past 30 years, and a lot of it can be a culprit from sweetened beverages and the empty calories that we're seeing in a lot of snack products.
And all of these things, I mean, they add up, right? And like, as you said before, people aren't doing the math for the most part.
Yeah, and you know, sugar doesn't really keep us satiated. So we eat so we can survive and to operate, but these empty calories are basically just making us more tired and probably looking to eat more food.
And it's interesting because you know about that whole addiction thing as you've been talking about, so more tired. I've often felt like when I come back from a trip where I'm crossing time zones and I'm fatigued or I've got a little jet lag, I have a want for energy and I find myself almost uncontrollably going after something that's high in sugar, low in nutrients, because I want to feel better. Like I know that that's going to give me a quick hit for that energy, but when you take it in, and correct me if I'm wrong, quick energy, quick depletion of energy.
Exactly. So many people, when they are sleep deprived, they tend to go and crave more carbohydrates, when in fact what you really should be doing is sleeping.
That's right. I know there are a lot of those sugar alternatives out there. There's the blue packet and the pink packet and the yellow packet and all that stuff. So these artificial sweeteners, what's the difference between real sugar that's natural and these things?
Okay, so there's controversy based on the sugar alternatives versus natural sugar. And the sugar alternatives, again, they are lower in calories. So for someone looking to manage their weight, or someone who does see that addictive behavior when they have something sweet to crave more sugar, should probably try and use the sugar alternatives.
Okay.
But for someone who is, you know, just trying to follow a natural diet, they should just try and moderate how much added sugar they're consuming in their diet. But again, I always say everything in moderation.
You know, there's this response in the brain whenever you don't have to just have real sugar. The artificial sweetener says your body is taking something in sweet. So what does your body do? Insulin starts to surge, right?
Right.
To process that sugar, and then insulin gets there and it's like, where's the sugar?
Oh,
it's a trick. So what happens, and I think this is how it's sometimes been leading to obesity, is insulin has nowhere to go, so it starts getting stored, and it's that belly fat that people start.
Exactly.
So I think that's a little culprit about those artificial sweeteners as well.
Yep.
All right, so you have brought here some food that are surprisingly to me high in sugar. Will you talk me through these?
Okay, so what we have here is fruit on the bottom yogurt, and although we know that yogurt is very good for us, yogurt naturally has, dairy actually has about 12 grams of sugar for every
that
1
natural
cup.
sugar, okay.
The natural sugar, but what's happening is to enhance the flavor, we're adding a flavored blueberry or strawberry or banana, whatever it is, so that's the added sugar.
Right.
And in just about 6 ounces, which is smaller than the average containers we are served,
just 6 ounces.
we're getting about 23 grams of
and
sugar.
That's this much sugar.
Right.
In a 6-ounce cup of fruit on the bottom yogurt.
Right.
Okay. Now, I see raisins, and I think most people think raisins are good for you. I mean, I'm from California. They've got those great California raisin commercials, and a lot of parents throw a box of raisins in their kids' lunches. What are they doing on our depot table?
So keep in mind, I mean, dried fruits are very concentrated in sugar because
Suck
we've
out all the
taken out all the water.
Got it.
So we're just left with, dried components of sugar. And this 1.5 ounce box here contains about 29 grams of sugar.
Wow. All right, and that's just this. I mean, that's unbelievable. Okay, and so a healthier alternative would be to what? Just
grapes.
Eat the whole grape.
Yeah,
Get the
natural,
water
where they come from.
and the fiber, and they're sweet too.
Yeah, and you're probably going to get more full from having less grapes because of the water content. Here,
Right.
this is more concentrated, so you're going to have more dense product.
Okay, this looks like a big old glass of orange juice with a lot of people and a lot of kids have for breakfast. What's it doing on the table?
Right, so keep in mind the labels can be very misleading because although a juice might say no sugar added,
Right.
there's no sugar added to the original 34 grams that are naturally in there.
So as you said, this can add up. You've got the added sugar or a lot of sugar in the lunch pail, then you've got the juice in the morning. Okay, and then for dinner, perhaps a hamburger. What is this and how much sugar is in there?
So condiments tend to be very high in salt and sugar, as we mentioned before, and right here, just in 4 tablespoons of a barbecue sauce, we're finding 30 grams of sugar. So
30 grams. Oh boy. All right, Sharon, this is really good information and it's great to see. So Sharon's going to stay with me because we are going to enter the grainy world of salt. Okay, we've learned a lot about sugar. Now we're going to turn our attention to the other white stuff we use on a daily basis, salt. I've got Sharon with me and we're going to talk about the consequences of too much sodium. Thank you so much for sticking around. So why do we need to be concerned about too much salt?
So keep in mind, we naturally do need sodium in the body to help transport information with our nerve signals and muscle contraction.
Right.
But the average American is taking in about 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams of sodium, which is almost double than the recommendations by the American Heart Association.
Wow, so that's on an average, almost double the recommendations. Now, I know, as we said before, you do a lot of education with your patients. What are people really surprised to hear about when you talk to them about salt?
So salt is actually in a lot of the processed foods that we eat on a daily basis. You don't necessarily need to be adding table salt into the foods that you're eating, but unfortunately they're coming in a lot of processed foods and foods that we grab on the go. And it's important to read food labels and even meet with a health professional to see if it's something that you need to be limiting in your diet.
People are surprised to hear that there's so much salt in the pretty much prepackaged food that they're buying.
Yeah, sodium acts as a preservative, so
Right.
it helps enhance the shelf life of any product.
Right.
It also changes the texture of foods. It also adds color.
Right.
So it has so many different properties in, again, processed foods that, again, food manufacturers are putting it in almost everything.
All right, so how do people know when they're taking in too much? Like you said, on an average, twice the amount. than the recommendations from the Heart Association. So how do people know when they're taking in too much?
It's important to understand that when you're looking at your sodium content, to try and keep it, the American Heart Association recommends about less than 2,400 milligrams, which is 1 teaspoon.
Okay, say that again. 2,400 milligrams. Okay, I'll say it. 2,400 milligrams is 1 teaspoon of salt a day.
But if someone has at risk for high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, congestive heart failure, stroke, they need to limit their sodium intake to less than 1,500 milligrams
Okay,
per
so
day.
there's certain conditions where people really need to pay attention and limit the amount of sodium that they're adding to their food.
Exactly.
Now, we talked about artificial sweeteners versus real sugar. What is the difference between processed salt versus unprocessed salt?
The sea salt, which is a natural form of salt,
Comes
usually
from?
the sea.
Right.
Again, it's natural. Again, people think natural meaning good for you. And it still has the minerals, you know, calcium, magnesium, potassium in there. But when you're stripping it of its nutrients and going back to table salt, you're still getting the same amount of sodium, whether it's processed or natural.
But you're lacking the minerals.
Exactly.
So you take raw salt in its form, whether it's mined or it's, you know, from the sea, and then it's stripped of its nutrients, and you've got that sodium and chloride, because the salt is 2 molecules closely together, like sodium chloride. Okay. Now, you brought some food here that are surprisingly high in sodium and salt. Talk me through these.
Yeah, so here what we have again is, you know, bread products, even crackers, which again, when they're salted, they enhance the flavor of the product, so people are going to consume more of it. And as we mentioned before, these are also simple sugars. So you're going to be craving more based on the salt, based on the sugar, and based on the simple carbs that are in there.
And I see people just sitting on the couch, and it's almost like this mindless, into the bag, into the mouth,
Once
into
you
the bag.
pop, you can't stop.
Once you pop, you can't stop. Okay, okay. Now this looks fairly healthy. I mean, you know, it's lean protein. What's going on there?
Right, so we have the processed deli meats. Again, if you do have a condition where you need to limit your sodium intake, it's probably best that you use the low sodium varieties or light varieties of the luncheon meats.
So teaching people to read those labels, because there are those labels out there.
So as we have become a lot more health conscious, the food industry has responded by putting a larger variety
Maybe
of
begrudgingly.
products. So you can find low sodium soups, low sodium luncheon meats, low sodium condiments.
And better choices, especially for people who have the risks.
Right.
Okay. And then here.
A lot of frozen items unfortunately have a lot of sodium in there, so it's important to, again, read the labels and see how much you're consuming in the whole day.
And mostly, though, that's used then because you make a prepared meal and you go to take it to market, freeze it, and have it stay well, so it's a preservative, as you said.
Right. So it's probably best, again, as we mentioned before, trying to keep food as natural as possible. I mean, here we also have a box of rice and beans. So again, canned items tend to be higher in sodium, so if you can rinse the beans, you'll be diluting the product, so it's going to be lower in sodium content. And, you know, again, rice doesn't have much sodium in it, so.
So the recommendation is, for on a daily basis, 1 teaspoon, which is 2,400 milligrams of sodium, correct?
Right.
So read those labels, right?
Exactly.
All right. Sharon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
When I come back, I'm going to have my weekly dose and talk about safe natural alternatives to both salt and sodium that won't harm your health.